If that'll start. There we go. Oh, I did the wrong one. Hello, and welcome back to Retrieving Sanity with your podcast host, Keegan, and this is your podcast for all mental health, addiction, recovery issues, and topics. And today we have a very special guest. His name is Larry Bograd, but real quick, let me give him a more proper introduction. My guest today is someone who has spent a lifetime exploring the spaces between silence and truth through novels, plays, films, and most recently, a powerful memoir. Larry Bograd is an award-winning author, playwright, filmmaker, and lifelong storyteller. His body of work spans from children's books to screenplays to documentaries, but his latest project, Bloodflow, takes us deep into personal terrain, a multi-decade journey to understand the generational impact of his father's suicide and how that loss echoed into his own life and health. With languages that's honest, tender, and unflinching, Larry invites us to witness the emotional archaeology of a man confronting the past, not just to explain it, but to transform it. So, Larry, how are you doing today?
I'm well, Keegan. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. It's great to have someone such as an esteemed author. It's great to have an esteemed author such as yourself on the show. So why don't you tell me a little bit more about who Larry is? Not so much the books, but who are you? What's your story?
You know, that's a question I wake up with every morning, but I'll do my best here. Well, I was born in Denver, Colorado. Both my parents were from the East Coast. My dad was actually from Eastern Europe and came to this country when he was 3. My family ended up in Colorado through a strange circumstance. My dad's older brother, my uncle, developed tuberculosis. And at the time, a lot of people came west. I don't know about where you are in Texas, but a lot of people came west, including Denver, because of the thin mountain air. They thought it was a healing for TB.
Yeah.
And then later he brought my dad out for college, and then my dad stayed to do medical school, and then later joined my uncle's practice, and they were doctors together until my dad's death. Anyway, I went through public school and, started college in Washington, D.C. at the end of the Vietnam War, but wasn't the most fun place to be. I did about 20 months in Europe, including a trip that we'll probably talk about, where I went to a couple places where my dad had been in Europe, and also his birth town. And then I went to graduate school in Seattle, and then made a beeline to New York with a novel tucked under my arm, thinking I'd be published immediately and a big hit, but that didn't quite work out. But I did back into a job as a children's book editor.
Okay.
Totally unexpected. And there was an artist we wanted to find a vehicle for. I ended up writing that, called Felix in the Attic. It ended up winning an award as the best book for children that year.
Oh, wow.
And so I pursued the children's book field, both picture books, young adult books, and middle grade books. Published, I think, 12 of those. But towards the end, I ran into some serious censorship and book banning issues, which I think encouraged my publishers to maybe take safer bets.
Oh, man.
So I moved back to Denver, and I joined a local playwriting group where I actually met my wife. She was running it. So I married the boss, and and I was a college professor for about 10 years, mostly teaching creative writing.
Oh, wow.
And then I kind of morphed into instructional design, and so my wage job was designing training, mostly for corporations and Fortune 100 companies, some nonprofit work. And then I just actually retired from that in April, after doing that for about 25 years. Yes, really.
Congratulations.
So now I have time to spend more time in my garden and be with my wife and grandsons, and already started a new writing project, so here we are.
Oh, man, that is way too cool. Thank you for giving us a nice background on who you are and where you come from and stuff. And, boy, I got to say that I'm kind of jealous. I wish I could be retired right now to just put my hands in the dirt and just work on, is this plant going to be okay? Do I have a green thumb?
Is it time to thin out the radishes?
Yeah, but of course it doesn't make it easy to have gone through this stuff, right? To see a finish line. Actually, let me rephrase that. While you were going through your career and everything, did you actually see that finish line?
Are you talking about work or my memoir?
Yeah, your work, but your retirement.
Probably not, because both my wife and I were in the arts, which meant we had no retirement funds until we were in our fees.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of got a late start on on that, and so I might have worked a couple more years, but I was working for an organization where there was a lot of change and not a lot of creativity. I originally, when I was hired there, they gave me a lot of freedom to be really creative and do a lot of multimedia stuff, learning games and all kinds of stuff.
Okay.
But looking down the road, it didn't seem to be that was going to be in the cards. So it was a good time to step back.
Interesting. Real quick, you did say you were dealing with censorship and banning on children's books. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure.
Because you...
Well, first of all, you have to appreciate that I'm talking about 30 plus years ago, when the atmosphere towards what was acceptable writing for kids was much more conservative. And also at the time, there was a lot of self-anointed or elected book reviewers, quote unquote, who had a lot of clout there was actually a really famous one in Texas run by a pretty far-right Christian husband and wife team. And their influence was such that if they flagged a book as, quote, being, quote, inappropriate, not a library in Texas would buy it. Not a school library or not a public library.
Wow.
So my first book was a fantasy, kind of like Sindak's Where the Wild Things Are, about a kid. It just starts with, for some reason, they've locked Felix in the attic. So it's about this boy who's locked in the attic. We don't really know why. But he ends up creating a life for himself where he collects rainwater and finds books to read and starts growing plants. And, there's books up there. And so by the time they open the door, he's not sure he wants to come down. Well, that book got censored because clearly I was promoting child abuse, locking kids in attics.
Wow.
And then a subsequent book was based on an experience I used to have as a kid where my mother would go shopping in a department store, and I was probably pretty young, like probably first or second grade. And she basically would have a bunch of errands to do, and she basically would just say, well, let's meet back here in an hour.
Yeah.
And I would have had to ask the clerk. But, so I would sort of mosey through the store and watch all the televisions lined up and look for free samples of food and go to the sporting equipment stuff. So the book was about a little boy who gets lost and is in a panic until he meets a girl who says, I do this every week. And they have a great time running through the store, trying on hats. And so that got censored because, you shouldn't have kids, shouldn't encourage kids to run around and abuse private property, right?
Are you serious? That's what little kids do. They don't need a book to tell them that.
And then when I got writing for young adults, I wrote a book about a kind of kid from a dysfunctional life who gets coerced into going on a robbery that turns bad. And it got some really good reviews for kind of exploring lives that at that point weren't being explored in young adult fiction. But at the same time, there were people that said, almost like this is a blueprint on how to end up in jail. And then the one that really got me in trouble was called The Better Angel, and it was basically two boys and one young woman, kind of a love triangle in a high school. Oh no! And there was some explicit stuff in there. I mean,
yeah.
What? I mean, the stuff now sounds like, are you kidding me?
Yeah,
But back on the other hand, it allowed me to capture events pretty much verbatim because those memories were only like 5 years old, right?
Yeah.
And so at least that book was kind of served as a repository for me to, have memories that if I was trying to reclaim at my age today, I'd probably just make shit up.
On that note, whenever you write memoirs, you are cataloging your life. You are cataloging every experience that you can essentially remember, right? So,
well, not necessarily every experience. I mean, I think people turn to memoirs for various motives. I mean, some people turn to memoirs for revenge, like Mommy Dearest. I don't know if you know that book. A lot of people want to catalog their recovery, their addiction from their recovery from addiction, or mental illness, or war. Some people write memoirs because they're as if their ego's not big enough. They want people to know what a success they are in business, things like that.
Yeah.
I think the better memoirs I mean, also, I wanted to write a literary memoir. I didn't want to
Okay.
make it journalistic, but
Yeah.
to me, the better memoirs are ones that really evoke a emotional or psychological response,
Oh yeah.
and that very much to the point of your podcast, talk about trauma
Mm-hmm.
and mental issues and how to come out on the other side.
Yeah.
You know, so. But yeah, it took me. I used to write a version about every decade, and sometimes, and I never quite got it right. And until I thought this time I finally solved the chronology, which I broke up, kind of like how memory works. You know, I can ask you where you're from, and my guess is you might immediately flash on your family of origin, or the countryside, or you know.
Yeah.
But you know, like what you did with me. If I was to say, Keegan, tell me about yourself, you might bounce. You know, I gave you
Oh
kind
yeah.
of a linear version of my career, but you know, you might just kind of go,
Oh,
oh,
I'd
then,
be all.
oh yeah, then you know, this remembers that and triggers that kind of stuff too. So I was trying to do a book that was closer to my notion of how memory might function. So.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And I think it's one of the first times that I've been able to actually kind of piece together how someone might make a memoir, just for the sheer fact that I know my memory is not good. So if I tried to do that, it would not go over well.
Well, also, you know, my memoir wasn't just strictly my memories. You know, people who knew my dad.
Uh-huh.
Was able to took some legal wrangling, but I was able to get his hospitalization records when he had nervous breakdowns.
Whoa, that's pretty tough.
Two of which I knew nothing about until long after his death.
Oh.
You know, I interviewed my uncle who I mentioned earlier, or talked to my mom about it. Over the years, maybe 5 or 6 different interviews.
Mm-hmm.
I interviewed some of his relatives that I met once, only for the purpose of interviewing them, because they knew my dad when he was much younger, kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I think if you can, you know, I think you'd be surprised if you sat down and also maybe just called on some people who you know, they'd probably help you fill in the blanks.
But isn't memory kind of fickle? Like,
oh yeah,
can't people plant a false memory in your head just because they're like, oh yeah, you remember that, don't you? And you're like,
oh yeah,
yeah, sure, yeah, okay, yeah, yeah. Okay.
So I think it's pretty hard. I mean, there are people with photographic memory, and mine's not bad, or used to be not bad until I got old. But I'd be surprised if you had somebody who was a good interviewer. I think you might be surprised at what gets conjured up.
Well, I mean, that's fair, because there's definitely moments that I'm sitting here going like, do I remember that? Yeah, eventually I either do, or there's so much more stuff to remember now, and that's the problem, right? And it's like, you just kind of got to dig, and it's a lot of the time, whenever I'm not looking for that memory, I have a weird memory pop up, and it's like, oh, hey, yeah, I forgot about that. I hope I don't forget it forever now.
But you know, my guess is, and again, I'm just throwing this out, but given the nature of your podcast, you know, I think there's a story there why you want to talk about these topics.
Oh yeah,
and you know, that alone could be worthy of a memoir in theory. You know.
Yeah, I mean, it's got its root for sure. So, I mean, it's got some episodes kind of talking on it, but it's really all about trying to hear everyone's perspective on retrieving sanity, you know, because what is retrieving sanity? Like, for you, what would you define retrieving sanity as? Because we kind of deal with it every day, in a sense. Because we're always losing it, either due to stress, frustrations, impatience, so on and so forth. And going into it is kind of hard, you know, because retrieving is an action. So it's not like I just lay and get sanity. So
yeah, you know, I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways. I mean, obviously, you can look at things towards meditation. You can look at things for getting out in nature. You know, maybe recreational drugs on occasion. You know, whatever. You know, as far as my story, I think coming to certain understandings about not only my dad's life, but how his suicide impacted me, and some of the life choices I made, positive life choices that I made, to not have his story become my story.
yeah,
You know, things like that. I think there's a lot of self-compassion that has to happen, because I do agree with you that there's tons of information, and life can be really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And some people, like in my dad's case, I mean, sadly, he was in the throes of a psychotic, depressive episode when he killed himself. So clearly, he lost suicide. I mean, he never, you know what I mean? He was in an insane state.
Yeah.
That unfortunately he didn't wait or didn't have the proper treatment to get himself out of.
Yeah. So real quick on that topic, how did you handle the news whenever that first happened?
Well, I mean, I had just turned 13 2 weeks earlier. My sister was only a year older. My brother was only a year younger. So, I was in 7th grade at the time.
Oh boy.
And I'm Jewish, and I sensed there was something off with my dad during that weekend, which typically tends to be a real happy occasion for Jewish families. Mm-hmm. But I didn't really know why. And for years, my parents had this excuse that, one, he was either working too hard, or two, he had a bad back. He had to go lie down. He had a bad back. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But 2 days after my bar mitzvah, it was decided that he would be hospitalized here in Denver. Hmm. And again, I think my mom being, more protective than elusive, kind of basically just said, Dad's been down in the dumps, the springs are always hard for him for a number of reasons, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But the day before he died, my siblings were busy, and my mom asked if I wanted to go visit him at the hospital. Mm-hmm. This is an episode from the memoir, but, we walked down the street to a coffee shop and kind of made small talk, and then my mom turned to my dad and said, "Don't you have something you want to tell Larry?" And, he basically said, I was like really tense. Yeah. And he said something to the effect of, "Son, I'm a sick man, but it's not the kind of sickness that you're used to hearing me talk about as a doctor treating patients. And it may take me a while to get better. And I miss you, but I'm not ready to come home. And, I hope in my absence you can kind of be not the man of the house, but that's kind of the message I got, help out Mom and take care of, be nice to your brother and sister and things like that." And then the next day, on a very ill-advised day pass, he came home and committed suicide. And so there was a couple-hour gap between that. My siblings and I were quickly shuttled off to my uncle's house. We had to wait. We still didn't know what happened. All that my mom had met us at the door and basically said, "Your father's had a terrible accident." Oh, no. So, as a kid, you're like thinking, did he fall off a ladder? Did the dog bite him? I mean, whatever. Yeah. Serious, was there a burglar? I mean, all kinds of crazy stuff. So, I still didn't really piece it together. And then when my mom showed up and took us to the backyard and said, "Your father's dead," I still was mystified. I think my sister knew, but I still was mystified. And it wasn't until a couple hours later when I heard my uncle on the phone to the Denver Post, the local newspaper, talking to the journalist who wrote the obituaries. And he just said, we've been in practice a long time in Denver. You talk to your editor. He knows me. All that I'm asking is one favor. Can you keep out of the obituary that my brother committed suicide, my dad? And that's where I finally went, that's how? Oh, wow. So, yeah, it was crazy. It was a horrible weekend, as you can imagine. I think everyone was shocked because a lot of there were out-of-town relatives and friends of my dad who'd come in 2 weeks earlier for my bar mitzvah, the celebration, and now we're coming back for his funeral. So it was rough. I don't know. Probably less than a year later, my mom made an offer to my siblings and do any of you want to go talk to a therapist?
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I was the only one interested.
Oh, wow, that's good for you.
And so I went to see this really compassionate adolescent clinical psychologist who specialized in adolescents. And we didn't necessarily talk that much, but we shot hoops and, walked around and talked a little bit about how things were happening at home. And I do think that was helpful for me in terms of trying to retrieve some balance. What you might call recovery or retrieving. suicidality to some extent.
Yeah.
And I've been in therapy off and on my adult life, sometimes talking about my dad and sometimes talking about my career as a writer and different things at different times in my life. And I always found that kind of helpful. I feel for people who don't have the option or don't have the financial wherewithal or even don't have, are skeptical of therapy and just stay away from it. Because I think in many instances it can really accelerate some healing.
Yeah, it really can. First of all, my deepest condolences on your father and everything on that. Of course.
Long time ago, but thank you.
Well, condolences can be offered at any point, at any time, because the pain, in my experience, is not ever gone. I just learned to grow around it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. And, I still get depressed around his birthday.
Yeah.
And it starts, there's there's a build-up. Spring goes.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily think at my age, I'm 72, I don't necessarily think at my age that I necessarily think about him every day. I do now because of the memoir.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's any kind of triggering things that can happen. I might see, a middle-aged man cross the street and go, Dad? I mean, this is like decades later, and after he died, I was convinced I saw him like on a bus.
Yeah.
Or, driving by our house. I mean, it's hard to accept that kind of death.
Yeah, it really is. I can really relate to thinking you're seeing your loved one that's passed and it's just someone else, because whenever I moved down to the DFW area, I had years before I had lost a younger cousin, was essentially a little brother to me. And whenever I moved down here, I saw like two people right away that looked just like him. And I was like, you liar. You're not dead. Of course, the truth is, it is what it is, but I can really relate to that. And there was a part of me that was like grateful that he wasn't it wasn't actually them, because I don't know. It's kind of complicated in a few ways, but in the end, I think it's just how everything happened is how it happened for the better, and I don't know what that is.
You make a good point. I mean, I might be kidding myself, but I actually think I wouldn't have gone into the arts if my dad had lived.
Oh, really?
I mean, my sister became a therapist, my brother became a pediatrician, my dad was a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
We were, well educated, and my mom didn't get to go to college, but she finished college when she was 55, and she got her master's at 65, and she got her PhD at 85, and went on the Phil Donahue show. You're probably too young to remember that. But,
I remember hearing about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, but I also kind of have a feeling that I might have like ended up in a different, maybe like teaching history or something like that. I've always been interested in that. But maybe. I kind of felt that the worst thing that could happen to me has probably happened.
Yeah.
And so if I don't want to live my life, then I'm,
yeah,
not taking advantage of what time I have.
There you go. That's fair. I do find it interesting that you actually are a creative type and you are the one that went to therapy. That kind of, for some reason, that's showing me like that's a great way to get pain out, to be creative. So.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I once went to therapy now probably 20 years ago or so. Because I kind of felt my writing career was over. I ran into all this censorship.
Yeah.
And I had these, this kind of flirtation with Hollywood, but then, I mean, supposedly it was on, it was going to be produced, blah, blah, blah. And that all fell apart. And I had a producer steal the screenplay and all kinds of shit like that. And I actually went into therapy for the reason that I just felt, I had wasted time as trying to make as a writer. And my therapist said, she listened to me moan and bitch for a while. And
as they usually
finally,
do.
At one point, she said to me, "Do you identify as a writer?" I go, "Yeah, I do identify as a writer. I mean, that's why I'm here." And she said, "I hope that you can keep that identity, creative identity, and not feel that other people are going to judge whether you're a writer or not." And that the financial market's not going to judge whether you're a writer or not. And that was very liberating. So I do think for creative people, therapy can be a good tool.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say it's an end all and be all. I think there's a lot of things that go into healing and, to use your term, retrieving sanity.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that, at least for me, therapist was a catalyst. It got me there kind of sooner and more cleaner.
Cleaner.
Yeah.
So
More cleanly.
yeah, we can definitely leave that one to the side. Some people don't mind talking about it, some people do. So on the off chance that you would be able to ask someone in your past anything regarding your father's suicide, what would it be and who would it be?
I asked a lot of questions already. I mean, I asked his brother, his brother was 14 years older, so he was kind of like a father/older brother.
Mm-hmm.
My mom was very open. I interviewed a lot of relatives. He had another brother I talked to, and cousins and things like that. I actually would like to. I wish I had the opportunity to know him better.
Yeah.
When somebody dies young, I don't know how you feel about your cousin, but sometimes you just flash on. Boy, it'd be fun if they were here right now.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And in my case, he didn't see me graduate high school. He didn't see me choose to become a writer. He didn't visit me when I was in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
He never met my wife. He never met our 3 daughters, who are now would have been his that. Just so much, and he was funny. I mean, when he was healthy, he was really fun to be with, and I definitely miss that. I think there's a lot of potential. I think there's a lot of traumatic things associated with death, but I would say parent loss, under certain circumstances, and in this case, a suicide, is right up there. In terms of something that just spins you into a whole other realm.
Yeah, it's not something you can ever really be ready for, even if you kind of knew it. Like, even if there was a terminal diagnosis, it's like, okay, well, that doesn't help anything.
Right. Yeah.
So,
no, I mean, I think, one thing, mostly a good thing, but sometimes not a good thing about humans is we develop, hopefully we develop really strong and hopefully healthy emotional bonds.
Mm-hmm.
So when those are broken, you're like lost in the wilderness.
Yeah.
And it kind of depends. If you're lucky, you have a personality where you kind of go towards homeostasis. You try to move back towards a balance, even if it's a little bit crazy.
Yeah.
But in some cases, people just spin out, right? I mean, they try to self-heal with drugs or
avoidance,
problematic
anything.
behavior, things like.
Yeah. Real quick, you were talking about developing stuff like that, and, well, we do develop personalities to help us deal with traumas, or just we develop them as we age because that's just part of being human. And you did also say that we develop those emotional bonds with people, which help build our personalities. So my question to you is, you were wondering what your father would be like and everything if he were still around, to see your family as it is now. But what personality traits of yourself do you embody that he had?
One thing I admired about my dad was he was a doctor and we lived well while he was alive. But he was never an elitist. He liked getting people's stories. I mean, back in the days where if you went to a gas station, somebody actually came out and checked your oil and put gas in your car. I mean, he would always roll down the window and go, "Hey, Chief, how's your day? What are you going to do when you're done pumping?" I mean, he would get people's stories, which I'm sure made him a better doctor too.
Yeah, for sure. And
he was funny. He was self-deprecating, which I think is a big part of that memoir. And also, I think it's important to have if you want to stay sane, is to at times, laugh at yourself.
Not every time.
I think he was a very compassionate person, which I hopefully am. I mean, I remember as a kid, my mother used to keep the books at the medical practice. And I remember at dinner, things got heated because my mother kept saying to my dad, you need to get these patients to pay. It's not fair that you gave them services and that they haven't paid you yet. And my dad just kind of like said, you know what? They'll pay me when they can pay me.
Yes.
And if they can't pay me, that's okay too. We have plenty of money.
Oh, man.
You know, so I think that's another thing I really appreciated about my dad was that when, you know, and you also need to understand that you know, his bipolarness, which tended to swing more towards depression, was not a constant part of our lives together. I mean, there were times where, you know, he was just a dad. You know, he'd come home and loosen his tie and shoot, you know, hoops with my brother and I in the driveway, and you know, barbecue in the backyard, and take us on road trips and hiking, and things like that. So I think I'm lucky in that I have I have nothing but compassion for people who write memoirs because they were in an abusive situation. You know, I don't feel that way at all. I feel I was quite fortunate to have the time I with him. So it would be interesting to maybe get more of I mean, it's way too late now, but it would have been interested to get more of impressions for people about him that he grew up with.
Okay.
You know, he kind of, the gang he ran with, you know, during the late Depression, things like that.
Yeah. That would have been really interesting. You have an amazing father, you know, because hearing him do that with his patients and stuff is just amazing. Like, that is the kind of doctor that we as a populace deserve, you know, because I'm in that realm of like, hey, I didn't choose to get hurt, so I don't really right. Like, I can't pay to heal a broken femur, you know, so it's like I didn't ask for a whole bunch of drywall to fall on me, but they're still like, hey, you got to pay like a whole bunch of money, and I'm like, nah, but hospitals don't like that, you know, so, but it sounds like he was able to really give the best of himself to you, you know?
That's a very loving way of putting it. I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think he did the best he could. You know, I years after he died, I was able to get his records from his last hospitalization, and I was probably in my late 20s, and they provided me a shrink to go through these records. They wouldn't give me the records, but they said, we'll have a doctor walk you through it. Yeah. And, you know, at the end of it, and also, you know, it's fairly clear that my dad had some organic thing happening, too. Like, he had a weird EEG the morning they sent him home. And in earlier hospitalization, there was reference to, you know, a possible brain tumor and stuff like that. So there might have been some organic cause behind his mood, depression, things like that. Yeah. But, you know, this very wonderful guy, I only met him once to go through these records, but you know, at the end he said, you know, I think your dad, he said, when I read all these records, I'm kind of amazed your dad lived as long as he did. Really? For all the trauma and burden that he was carrying, and you know, and I hope you accept that, you know, he did the best my guess is he did the best he could when he, you know, as he could, and I think that's true. I've heard that from other people, that, you know, people do the best they can. Yeah. So, you know, you can get crazy at them, but at some point, if you're going to have any level of compassion, you don't have to go give them a hug, but at some point you might have a more balanced view that, you know, given their personality, part of me understands this, even if it was, you know, stupid behavior, hurtful behavior. Yeah, and I've got to say that I'm glad that he was able to be around for you as long as he was, because, I mean, those earlier years are even more formative, and I mean, that would have really flipped everything around even 10 times harder, if not worse, for you, right? And yeah, And he shared what he knew in terms of like things like science, and we talked politics in our house. I mean, he was, you know, he was a very engaged dad, I thought. Yeah. As was my mom as a parent, so I feel very fortunate about that. Yeah, that's awesome. And
whenever, let's see, and being 13 was the beginning of being a teenager, you know? So you were literally thrown into a really crappy position really early on into teenage years. And so you didn't have a semi-solid rock to kind of chip away. It's kind of like someone blew it up for you and you had to go and glue the pieces back together and then maybe take them apart because they didn't fit right. So how did you handle yourself into growing up? Does that make sense? Like, how did you didn't have him to kind of guide you into manhood. So, I mean, it's different for everyone, right? What happened on your end, in your head?
Well, it's always interesting because I remember when I first went back to school, 7th grade, after my dad died, nobody would look me in the eye.
Really?
I mean, people would like just pass me, even people that I thought were like, friends, school friends.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time I talked to somebody later about it, and I kind of had a feeling like suddenly I was like a leper, like an emotional leper. Nobody wanted to get too close to me,
Yeah.
I guess part of me is fortunate in that I was a very self-reliant kid. I wasn't a jock, so I spent a lot of time alone, and I learned to make the best of time alone. I didn't necessarily feel sorry for myself. So I think that's kind of one reason I was able to keep that self-reliance evolving as I got older.
Yeah.
I had older relatives that I think, did what they could, and friends of my parents kind of checked in on me and things like that.
Yeah.
And I think my mom was a very active parent. I mean, she was probably the more active parent anyway, when my dad was alive. And I think she, one of her main motivations was keeping the remaining family together. And healthy. So I think having that family unit not just disintegrate because of this trauma was a big advantage to me to kind of evolve naturally into manhood as naturally as any of us can evolve into manhood, that kind of thing. I had good friends. I developed a circle of male friends that some of whom I'm still in touch with all these years later. So I think even exploring some of that manhood stuff with peers was a good way to get a grasp on things too.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. But here's a weird question. I don't know necessarily where it came from or if it'll make sense, but do you feel like you have left a part of yourself back whenever you first got that news?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because, I mean, I can generate that presence.
Yeah.
I can go back to that hot, very hot late May afternoon in my uncle's backyard with my mom on her knees, trying to pull my siblings and me close to her and giving us this news. And so a lot of that stuff's very, very vibrant and remains vibrant. And, I end my book, I don't know, you may not have had a chance to read it, but, I end my book with the kind of fortuitous thing happened that a year ago, May, as I'm preparing for my usual May slump, sad memories, our last grandson was born on the day my dad died. And I kind of took that as a sign, like this is life. I mean, going forward, I'll remember this day for my grandson's birthday, much more than I want to fixate on this day as yet another year without my dad. So.
Yeah. Here's a really weird question along those lines. Have you ever heard of the people that say that they had their family reincarnate into the new generation in their family?
Yeah, I've heard it.
I mean, the same day.
We had a really lovable mutt, and I used to half kid to my wife saying, "I think his name was Otis." I said, "I think Otis has a bit of my dad in him,
He probably did.
and my wife would just kind of look at me like, okay.
But
But yeah,
no,
I mean, I'm a big believer in genetics and things that are both things that one obviously inherits and stuff that, like that, I never really probably at some point in my life, I thought personalities are kind of self-made. And, now I look back and I go, like what you asked me earlier. Now I look back and I go, okay, definitely my dad, definitely my mom. I mean, that kind of stuff.
yeah.
And I see that in my daughters. And I don't necessarily see it in my grandsons because they're young.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely can look at a couple of them and just go, wow, that's kind of what I look like. I mean, I'm actually looking at my bulletin board and I have a picture of myself about 4 years old.
Huh.
And then when I look at particularly one of my grandsons, I just kind of go like, oh, that's little Larry. Poor kid. Hope he doesn't turn bald, So,
Man, I was actually looking at your website before we started recording and everything, just so I could get some more context on a couple of things. And I did see the photo gallery, and there were a couple of those where I was like, is that him or is his dad? So that is amazing that, to have a date of birth and just to have two of those momentous,
major life events,
big life events. Thank you. I was like, momentous is like a joyous usually, and that is not necessarily joyous.
Right.
But to have those two being shared is just really powerful. I think the universe was trying to send you a message.
You'd have to be an idiot not to love that reframing.
Yeah.
Of the young life coming into being on a day that historically was mourning one that was taken away.
Mm-hmm. And it just has so much personal meaning too, that it was like, if there was ever a message for you, I think that was it.
Oh, I agree. No, I thought it was very powerful. I actually end my memoir with that moment.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool. So real quick, where can people find your memoir?
Well, if they go to I don't know if you're going to have it in your show notes, but, they just go to my name, LarryBograd.com.
Mm-hmm.
They'll get information about the book. They can order it there, or they can go to their, it's on all the all the online bookstores, and hopefully you can get it ordered if you want to support. Thank you very much. If you want to support a independent bookstore.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also order it from the website. There's a couple choices there that you can do it.
All right. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Ngram Spark, Bookshop.org, and Goodreads?
Goodreads is not where you order books, but it's where readers recommend books and leave reviews and things like that.
There you go. So anyone out there that's going to read the book, make sure to leave a review, please.
Yes.
So, real quick, we are getting close to time, but I know we have not covered nearly as much as we would like to, because you wrote a memoir that lasted, well, not necessarily lasted, you've revised it several times. So there's no way we can get all of that into an episode here.
Sure.
So would you like to be back on the show sometime in the future?
That'll be fun. No, awesome. I really enjoy talking to you, and I like the tone of the conversation, so sure.
Of course.
Just reach out. I don't have a very busy social calendar anymore, so.
All right. I am a little bit jealous of that one. That is definitely something I am not, looking forward to. I wake up every morning and just how many notifications? I don't know.
How many recordings do you do a week?
It really depends. I'm trying to keep it to 3 or 4 maximum.
Yeah, it's a lot still.
It is a lot, and I'm a one-man show doing all the editing, and so, I've got a lot on my plate. We're actually booked out until... We're not booked out... Okay, let me rephrase that. I have bookings open from now until indefinitely, but I have bookings up until December as well.
Wow.
Yeah, so you getting in is perfect timing, because we can... Well, and that's the thing, is that whenever I have a guest on, it's kind of easier to get them on again, even if it takes a few weeks or whatever. But it's like, hey, we got you, here you are, and let's get more of your story. And that's the thing, too, is that I like to keep it really candid here, because it's just part of being human. Like, if you watch too much edited stuff, it's like, oh yeah, that is not good.
Right.
Like, yeah. And we really just get to see the person for who they are, you know? Because if I try to keep it scripted to the point to where it's like, all right, it's been 5 minutes, answer, hurry up. All right, next question. All right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's not fun.
I've had some podcasts where they asked me to answer some questions, and that was the podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
They would pose the same question, I would give the same answer, but it would be verbal, you know. So there wasn't much spontaneity, let's just say.
No, I like to keep everyone on their feet. And with that being said, Larry, reading through your work. Sorry, hang on. There we go. All right. Having spoken to you now and getting a better idea of who you are and what all you've been through, I'd like to invite you into something we call the Healing Hot Seat. It's a rapid fire round, no editing, no overthinking, just gut level honesty. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. Let's go. Number 1, what's one belief about yourself that you had to rewrite during your healing journey?
Lightning about it. I think I had to rewrite my capacity to mourn. I think I used to be a bit more like, oh, I can handle this, or I'm just putting a story together. But I think writing the memoir opened up a lot of emotional stuff that might not have been opened otherwise.
That's a really thoughtful one. I like that. Thank you. Number 2, which decade of your life surprised you the most, and why?
Wow. Well, I'd say my 30s was the most eventful. I was still being a writer in New York City. I left during the AIDS epidemic, moved back to Denver, met my wife. You know, we had 3 young daughters, and I changed from being a college professor to being a training design developer. So I'd say, you know, we took some good trips. We went overseas with our daughters and things like that. So I would say that's definitely one of the more nostalgic.
Sweet. I love that, and it gives me a little bit of hope because I'm in my 30s.
There you go.
Number 3, if your healing had a soundtrack, what song would definitely be on it?
Well, there's an Emmylou Harris song called, I think it's called Concerto in D minor. It's very mournful, but it's also very life-fulfilling.
Okay.
You know, it's probably about a 20-year-old song now. So I would say, you know, I always kind of think about that song sometimes when I'm in a certain mood.
Okay, sweet. I love that. Thank you very much for that one as well. And number 4, what's a story from your life that changed meaning after you revisited it as an adult?
And I was able to kind of, in doing all this investigation and such, I was able to kind of realize that, you know, he had this cyclical sanity, if you will. And I also was to not obsess so much about his illnesses, but as we talked about earlier, just, you know, think about what a wonderful guy he was.
Yeah. Okay, sweet. That's a really good one, too, because I think that one maybe never really closes all the way, right?
Right.
All right. So, number 5, what part of your father's story felt most mysterious or misunderstood until recently?
Well, I think part of my answer is how much the understanding of mental illness and the treatment of it has changed. I mean, you know, I read the earlier hospitalizations, and they're saying, you know, if he doesn't get better, we should consider a frontal lobotomy.
Whoa.
But, you know, we're talking about the late 1940s, 1950s.
Still.
You know, or I know they had a fair amount of electric shock treatment, and I'm sure the dosage was like closer to Frankenstein than what they, you know, use today. So I think my understanding of, I mean, it's good. I don't think we're there yet, obviously, but I do think the awareness, the acceptance, progressively better treatment of mental illness has been an awakening to a happy one.
That's good. Sweet. All right. Number 6. What's one healing tool or practice you thought was a little woo-woo until you tried it and it worked?
I don't know if I've ever been very woo-woo in that way.
I mean, therapy is woo-woo to some people.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people go into therapy, and part of them don't want it to work. Or they want to befriend their therapist, or want to make sure they're entertaining the therapist and not really doing the work, the woo-woo work. So yeah, I think my attitude towards therapy has softened a lot over time. I know how to use it more as a tool now rather than just somebody to vent, you know, and stuff.
And that's a good one. And I think we could explore that a little bit on the next episode.
Okay.
But let's see, number 7. Who's one person, living or gone, you wish could read your memoir?
My dad.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. That'd be way too cool.
I think he'd be. He'd probably say, "Not got that wrong," but that's okay with me.
He would do it lovingly, I'm sure.
He underwent a big emotional change. He was part of the occupation forces after World War II, and he went to some of the displaced persons camps where Holocaust victims went and sometimes lived for years as refugees. And then when he came home, he had his first nervous breakdown. And so I would really want to talk to him more about what happened. Because everyone just kind of speculates, like he left a happy-go-lucky guy and he came home and had a nervous breakdown. So.
And I'm sure he was an amazing guy before that. He was during it too, and obviously after as well. So it sucks that life just does that to people. So.
Agreed.
Number 8. If your inner critic had a name, what would it be? And you can't say Larry.
A name?
Yep.
Well, it'd be kind of like a jester's name. It'd be like, stop fooling around.
It'd be a phrase, a catchphrase.
Yeah, catchphrase like that.
All right. I love that. And number 9. What's a phrase or quote you come back to when life gets overwhelming? And you can make it up if you can, if you want.
I don't know. We live in the foothills of Rocky Mountains. We live in Southwest Denver. And we live on a hill. And every morning I go out and I just look at the view and I just go, this is another great day to be alive. Sometimes it doesn't turn out to be a great day that day, but at least that's always a lift to me, to have that view and just realize how fortunate I am and how extraordinary nature is. I wish we took much, much better care of it. Things like that.
Me too. And I love that because it's kind of saying this moment is great to be alive. So I think that's what really counts.
My wife used to say to our girls, like, be in the moment. Like don't worry about this, don't worry about that. Just be in the moment.
Oh, it's hard to do too. Let me tell you. And lastly, for number 10, what legacy do you hope your storytelling leaves behind?
Well, I hope it's not just one thing. I hope it's that people find it well written. A lot of people have commented on how I've been able to use a lot of humor and what would by default seem to be a really depressing story. I think I've also been complimented that I kind of like tackled these issues head on. I didn't get sentimental. And I didn't. I'm a little wary of memoirs that are kind of like, here's the story of my victimhood. So people have been very complimentary that I was able to kind of keep focused on the story and getting, and weaving it with my own life and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I'd like people to kind of remember me as a gentle, passionate, funny, sometimes ridiculous person. That'd be okay with me.
It sounds like an awesome legacy to be left behind. Did I say that right? I think so.
Yeah.
So, thank you very much, Larry, for taking participation in today's Hot Healing Seat.
I'll get faster next time, Keenan, I promise.
No worries on that. It is also on the host. I am the one running the pace, and I am...
We'll tighten those up.
Yeah, I can always tighten up the game show segment. I can always sit there and just be like, all right, we're going to have a game show, so be ready. So I could always add sound effects and stuff.
I actually was on a podcast where if I said something that interested the host, I would hear studio applause. And the first time he did it, I was like...
Did that throw you off a whole lot?
Yeah, it did. Even when I did it for like the third or fourth time, I just looked like, this is crazy.
Weird. I mean, some people might like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
If we're going to have a live audience, they're going to be submitting chats and stuff like that. They're not going to be behind me. They're not here in this room. If they're in your room, that's cool. Just don't turn the camera around because that's a lot of pressure on me.
There you go.
So
no, I'm here by my lonesome. So.
Well, you're not lonesome anymore because you've got the internet behind you. And also, because you were in the healing hot seat today, you made it through the flames gracefully, I might add. And on the show, when someone brings vulnerability and creative courage to the mic, we don't let them leave without honoring that properly. So, Larry Bograd, we now bestow upon you the ceremonial, completely made up, yet absolutely meaningful title of The Memory Weaver of Quiet Truths. So
nice. I'll take that. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for being on the show, being vulnerable, and showing us what it means to actually use our gifts for the world, because you're showing yourself and how it takes to be vulnerable, what it takes to be you, essentially. And it's just going to help the world see life through different lenses, help people piece together parts of their own stories maybe, and just make the world a better place. I really do think so.
Well, I hope so. Thank you.
Of course. Larry, one more time for everyone out there, they can find you at larrybograd.com, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And where do you prefer that they buy the book?
I don't really care as long as they buy it.
Fair enough.
You know, everybody says you got to get up on Amazon, but, you know, I have some political misgivings about Amazon, and they just, but, you know, I would prefer that they support an independent bookstore if possible.
Okay, then we will definitely try and do our best. I think Lulu is pretty good at doing that kind of stuff too, right? Like lulu.com?
I don't know that one.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe give it a check out. Maybe it'll be good for you. I don't know. But anyways, Larry, we have come to the end of this episode. So everyone out there, thank you for listening to Retrieving Sanity on WDJY 99.1 FM. And as always, love yourself, love the person next to you if you can, and just try to be a nice person for the rest of today. So for now, that's all we have. Be sure to check us out next week. And as always, much love. Shalom.